I grew up in British Columbia, where the forests feel like they breathe, the kind of place where mist coils around your ankles in the morning like it's alive, where your voice doesn't echo, and something about the air makes even the smallest sound feel loud. My first real job out of college was working for a regional wildlife research team during a fire season that ended early. One project we had going was trail placement and wildlife camera rotation in a stretch of forest few hikers ever touched. My supervisor, Sean, was a hardened type, ex-military, the kind of guy who said little but always seemed to know more than he let on. This specific trip was solo. Sean had dropped me at a back access ranger post we reached using an old quad tunnel through the forest. Said he'd be back in 72 hours and left me with radio gear and maps. Technically nothing I hadn't handled before. I was supposed to check 3 camera stations, swap out SD cards, and maybe install a new tree sensor for ambient sound testing. But there was an immediate newness to the area. Like the trees here weren't used to company. The first night was uneventful. Just quiet. No wildlife came near my top camp, not even bugs. That wasn't unusual for the elevation. But it struck the wrong nerve. Usually I hear at least the skittering of raccoons. Maybe moths hitting my lantern. But nothing. Second day, I get to the first camera and the SD card is gone, not lost. Cleanly removed, and the plastic casing had fresh scratch marks around the slot like someone had used a knife to pry it out. I wrote it off. Maybe someone else from the team forgot to mark it in the log. The second sight was worse. The tree we'd mounted the camera on had deep claw marks running about 7 feet vertically along its trunk. Thick gouges, not bare scratches, too evenly spaced, too sharp, something with 5 or 6 razor-thin tips, and the scent. The air smelled coppery, like nickels rubbed between the palms of a sweating hand. I recorded the marks, walked a couple circles around the area, trying to spot fresh tracks. Nothing but one half-buried boot print pointing deeper into the woods. Standard issue size, same as mine, but wrong brand. Government surplus, something the rangers don't use anymore. That's when the buzzing started. You ever hear something that isn't a sound so much as a pressure, right behind your ears? I stopped moving, tried to figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't insects. It felt electrical, like faulty wiring. Then out of nowhere, a sharp crack. A clean branch snap. I wasn't proud of how fast I bolted, but I've been in those woods enough to know when not to play tough. Back at camp that evening, the quiet was replaced by a low whining I initially thought was the wind through the fire-burned stumps nearby. But it followed me, 30 feet behind, always behind. By the third day, something was watching. You can feel it. I didn't sleep. I kept the fire going loud, wasting my emergency wood. Kept the flare stick in my left hand all night. Sean came to pick me up before sunrise. He looked tired, almost spooked, and without saying a word, handed me my morning coffee. Stared past me into the brush, then asked a simple question. "You see it?" I didn't answer. He nodded, like he didn't expect me to. We packed everything faster than ever before. Never filed that trip's footage. Cameras came back blank anyway, even though the red light had been on. The second story comes from a man I met while camping last September. Since retiring, he lives out of his truck and follows deer migration patterns across state forests. He told me this over an open fire, voice low, but eyes never leaving the tree line. It was late November. Snow had just started to fall over rural Michigan. Thick woods, no roads, but logging paths. He'd parked his vehicle near an old ranger depot, a tiny concrete structure built into a wooded slope. The kind of place that looks abandoned, but feels watched. He woke one night to tapping. Slow, deliberate knuckling against the aluminum siding of his camper. At first he thought it was a raccoon, maybe even frost cracking, until the tapping moved, window by window by window, circling the camper. Tink, tink, tink. He didn't have a weapon, just a ski pole, a hunting knife, and a flashlight. He stepped out quietly, rounding the back of the truck, light already on. He didn't see anything. Fresh snow covered the prints near the vehicle. Human prints. Bare feet, big, long toes. Then he saw it, between the trees. Not glowing eyes, not movement. Just something off. A silhouette holding unnaturally still in a place it shouldn't fit. Slender, tall, not leaning. It didn't shiver or breathe in the cold. He climbed back into the truck, locked himself inside, and killed the lights. Stayed awake until dawn. When the sun came up, he got the hell out of there and never camped in that part of state land again. I've seen bears, wolves, even a cougar once, he told me. But I've never felt that kind of silence. Third story starts in Oregon. Backcountry team searches for a missing person. Middle-aged male, experienced hiker, vanished during a solo multi-day trail. His last known location was a logging trail deep in a national forest not known for crime. No scary urban legends. Just woods. Deep woods. The kind that muffles sound. A ground team of 5 was flown out to sweep a grid. After 2 uneventful days, they started hearing chirping, like an emergency signal, but artificial, like it was being mimicked. It didn't come from their radios. It echoed strangely, always just ahead. After following it for 3 hours, they found something. A backpack, zipped and upright. Water bottle untouched. Map inside. Beneath it was 1 sock and a wallet. They fanned out, marking the trail. The signal chirp happened again, this time right behind one of them. He spun around. No one there. They gave up the search the next morning. The lead ranger never wrote the report. Said the man had decided to disappear. But when logging data off their GPS, one of them noticed something odd. All their GPS trackers glitched at the exact same timestamp, showed all 5 of them in different places. But each spot was marked with the same note in the saved logs, like someone typed it manually. It read, "Still watching." Fourth story came to me from a friend who once worked as a seasonal firefighter in Colorado. Forest duty. backbreakingly physical work in the thickest, densest patches of land you can imagine. To pass off time at night, crews told stories, some true, some exaggerated, but one stuck out because no one ever laughed after it was told. It started during a low-level wildfire cleanup. Nothing major, just backburn maintenance. They were cutting perimeter lines when one of the workers radioed in. Said he saw movement about 150 yards northeast. Not smoke, not flames. Someone walking through the still burning brush. He went to investigate, thinking maybe it was a clueless hiker locked into a death walk. He even shouted, "Hey, fire line, turn around!" But the figure didn't, just kept walking toward where the flames were still smoldering. What made it strange, he said, is that he couldn't make out any details, not clothes, not facial features. It looked more like a shadow moving across paper. Thin, tall, like it had no weight. And where it walked, the ground didn't burn. Later, they found boot prints in the ash that didn't match anyone on the crew. Then, 10 feet past the last print, a shovel, perfectly clean, like it had been stored in a shed, not dropped in the middle of a fire zone. No soot, no burn marks, and resting on the handle was a single black feather. No birds had returned to that section post-burn. Not yet. There hadn't been rain in days. That feather shouldn't have been there. They say sometimes, when you're clearing the lines in solo shifts, you can still hear boots crunching behind you in the ash, only to turn and see nothing but smoke, and the faint impression of a figure standing just beyond it. Fifth one's mine again. Happened when I was 17, tagging along with my uncle on one of his weird obsessions. Old trail recon. He used to work mapping out abandoned logging paths deep in the northeast woods, and even after he'd retired, he kept up the hobby. Called it his project. Said he wanted to map forgotten land before it was lost under regrowth forever. We were upstate for 3 nights, bushwhacking through places no GPS covered. Third day in, we reached the stretch of deep forest untouched by anything recent. Trees that had never been cut. No underbrush cleared. Even animal trails seemed thin. Nature builds layers slowly when undisturbed, and this place had layers upon layers. It was quiet. All sound muffled. I started to get that heavy pressure in my head, the kind you feel when you've been underwater too long. My uncle noticed I wasn't speaking. He looked back and said, "Keep walking. Don't stop here." We found the ruins of something about 40 minutes later. They looked like stone foundations, about the size of a small house, but way too old to be anything post-colonial. Covered in moss, every inch. Like nature had tried really hard to erase whatever happened there. But here's the weird part. Right in the middle of the clearing was what looked like a shallow pit with smooth walls. Like someone had dug a perfect square and then changed their mind. Nothing in it, just soil and moss. My uncle stood at the edge and muttered something like, "Still open?" I asked, "What's open?" But he didn't answer, just walked faster until we were out of that area entirely. That night at camp, I brought it up. He finally broke the silence and told me a theory. He'd mapped over 40 trail-dead villages in his life. Small camps, full-blown towns, logging stops. Most were nothing. Some were sad stories. And a few, just a few, seemed like they hadn't been abandoned, but left quickly. Walls caved in from the inside. Tree growth that seemed unnatural. He said those pits happened in more than one location. Strange square holes, all exactly the same size, always untouched by weather. He used to think they were old wells, until he saw one filled to the top with bark and blood, in a village with no name. We left early the next day. He never finished his map. The project stayed on a hard drive. 2 years later, he passed away. I opened one of his files out of curiosity and found a list of GPS pins marked in red. That spot we camped in was tagged. The note next to it? Do not revisit. Number 6 came from a hiker in the Appalachian region. She was solo camping with her medium-sized dog, Nora, and had set up camp alongside a creek she'd hiked to before. Day was normal. Foggy morning, clear afternoon, starry evening. The strange thing didn't happen until after she crawled into her tent and drifted off around midnight. Around 1:30 a.m., she woke up to Nora growling. Not barking, not whining. That deep, guttural growl dogs give when something is too close for comfort. At first, she thought deer, maybe raccoons. But Nora didn't stop. The tent flap was zipped, but she could hear movement around the tent. Slow footsteps on old brush, stepping over stones, crunches that didn't match animal pacing. She stayed frozen, hoping the sound would pass, until it suddenly went dead silent. And then, knocking. 3 knocks. Right on the fabric of the tent. Not clawing, not pawing. Firm, intentional knocking. She said the sound hit so hard she could see the imprint. That was when Nora lost it, barking wildly. The woman grabbed her whistle and flare, shouted out loud she was armed, and pulled the knife she kept under her pack. No response. She waited, shaking, until sunrise. When she stepped out at first light, her entire camp looked undisturbed, except for one thing. Just outside the tent, in the fresh soil near the fire pit, were 2 smaller mimic tents, made of sticks, twigs crossed and bent to look exactly like her shelter. Right down to the fabric color and shape. The cordage was woven bark. She didn't eat, didn't drink, packed everything in under 10 minutes, and hiked out nearly 12 miles non-stop. She filed a report with the ranger service but never heard back. When she returned a full year later on a dare, to prove it was all in her head, she couldn't find the site. The trail had washed out. Area overgrown. But where the fire pit should have been, she found something strange. 3 rings of stones, each with a pile of folded bark inside. One of them had a dog's tooth inside it. Story 7 comes from an experienced backpacker who was used to doing deep woods cross-country travel, often for photography. He said he never put stock in ghosts. Monsters? No. People, sure. Bears, yes. But never believed in forest legends. Except now, he says. He won't even sit back to a tree anymore. Not after this one trip in Arizona. He was on foot crossing a narrow, dew-soaked gully at dusk when he felt something scrape his calf. He looked down and saw nothing, but it definitely felt like a burr or a twig. He checked. No scratch. No insect. An hour later, he set up camp on high ground, made coffee, and prepared for a night of editing. But as the sun dipped, he noticed something off. The exact ghost of a handprint pushing outward from inside his tent, only visible for a second, as if pressed from behind the fabric. When he unzipped it, empty. He backed away, flashlight in hand, shined it everywhere. Nothing. That's when he noticed claw marks, 4 sets, scoring the opposite side of the tree his tent sat against. Fresh, deep, wide as a man's chest. That's when he realized something. When he set it up, there were no claw marks on that tree. And the worst part? His camera file from that evening, set to time-lapse, oriented toward that very tree, was corrupted, but the preview thumbnail showed him standing outside his own tent. The 8th story came from a SAR search and rescue dispatcher in Alaska. She was the calm voice on the other end of the line for hunters, hikers, and climbers who found themselves in places they shouldn't be. Usually, her job meant relaying information, monitoring incoming GPS pings, and keeping emergency crews looped in. But in 2019, she says she got a call that still doesn't make sense. It came in at 4:13 a.m. Heavily scrambled, faint, as though the person was whispering through a bad connection. But the geodata was clear. Deep forest north of Wrangell, St. Elias. Someone hiking alone had activated a distress beacon, then called the emergency line directly. What she heard was a man saying, "Not alone. Tell them I'm not alone." Every few seconds, he'd repeat it, sometimes sounding calm, sometimes desperate. His exact location didn't change, but one feature of his signal did. The elevation drifted every 30 seconds, increasing by 2 or 3 feet each time, as if the man was slowly rising or being lifted. Teams were dispatched immediately, but by the time they reached the location 12 hours later, they found nothing. No backpack, no footprints, no blood. Just a GPS beacon jammed into the bark of a tree 30 feet up, like it had been placed there by hand. The oddest part? There was no damage to the tree. The bark wasn't broken or gouged. It was clean, smooth. And the signal? Still transmitting, even after it was removed. She told me she checked the call logs every week for months afterward. That number never appeared again on their system. 9th story was submitted by a forestry student from Montana. A girl studying sustainable timber management and wildlife preservation. She'd taken a solo field trip to evaluate restoration trails in a lesser-known swath of forest, one that had been neglected for over 60 years. She had gear, a plan, a personal locator beacon, a solar charger, and a satellite tablet with maps and routes. Very capable, but near the 3rd site, she strayed off her plotted course to photograph what looked like an unusual tree formation. A perfect arc of spruce trees, bent like a doorway, which she assumed had been shaped by snow load decades earlier and grown that way naturally. But at the base of that arc, instead of soil, she found symbols etched into the dirt. Perfect spirals, repeated grooves, not fresh, but kept clean, like someone had been sweeping them. She took photos and moved on. That night, multiple things malfunctioned. Her flashlight flickered even with new batteries. GPS locked up. Thermostat kept reading incorrect elevation. Her compass spun. And after she finally decided to call it and hike back early, just before dawn, she took a breather near a tree fall to check the map again. There, engraved at eye level in the bark, was her name, exactly spelled. First, middle, and last. Not carved violently, not rushed, but clean, worn and faded, as if years old. She never told her professors. She never got the photos off her SD card. The file was corrupted days later. But she mailed the card anonymously to a journalist who covers folklore. Last anyone checked, it's never been published. She dropped out of her program the following semester, took a job inland, doesn't hike anymore. The 10th and last story is mine again. It happened the year I started keeping track of these, documenting them, gathering what other people had seen, heard, or felt out in places where no one else goes. I was car camping along the coast of Washington, right near a national park boundary. I pulled onto a long, crumbling road that led nowhere on the map, hoping for isolation during a storm that hadn't arrived yet. Trees up there grow differently, like they lean to hear you. I parked beside a slim rise, pitched a tent between two curved cedars, and sat with tea and half a story scribbled in a notebook. Somewhere after midnight, the wind kicked up. The storm was sparse, just gusts and leaves. But the noise it made through the cliffside trees was loud. Mixed into all of that was this. Not a voice exactly, more like a frequency. Low, murmuring, the same pitch over and over, vibrating faintly through the base of the tent pole. That's how I felt it. I stayed still, listening. It stopped after a few minutes. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, measured, not panicked, not animal-like, bipedal, crunching twigs, then stopping. A pause, breathing, or the illusion of it. A rhythmic dragging of air close enough for condensation to lightly fog my tent wall in patches. I'd heard enough stories by then to know. Don't speak. Don't provoke. After almost an hour, yes, I watched. Those steps moved on. Into the trees. And at first light, I packed up. Didn't eat, didn't write, just walked the perimeter before leaving. That's when I noticed something etched into the dirt around my tent. A spiral. Broad, wide. Not some meaningless scuff. 2 circles thick. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. Next to it, 2 downward prints, side by side. Long, deep. Something that hadn't jumped or crawled, just walked. left its mark, and went. People often ask, are these stories real? And I always answer the same way. Real, they were lived. And once something has been lived by someone, by some mind, by some scar, then it's real. More than real, sometimes. It waits for someone else to walk far enough beyond the comfort zone of civilization to find it again. Usually in the woods, always in the quiet, sometimes as a sound, sometimes as a dream, and sometimes as a story someone else tells you, not to entertain you, but to warn you. The stories don't end just because the telling stops. Some people say the woods hold memories like the rings of a tree, layered silently, always there, even if no one looks. But some memories are active. They breathe. And some stories don't wait politely to be found. They come back with you. A guy once messaged me anonymously. No name, no background. Just a block of text, dense and broken up, like he'd written it while trying not to look behind him. Or maybe he was typing with one hand and holding a weapon with the other. The summary: whatever followed him out of the woods didn't stop just because he got himself back to the dirt road. He'd been hiking along a knife trail in Colorado, called so because most of it's ridge walking, with dangerous drop-offs on both sides. And he kept seeing a white figure in the distance. Not ghostly, worse. Dressed, cohesive, darting between trees that shouldn't have supported any large weight. Every hour, this shape would appear, closer, more confident, never looking directly at him, never lingering long enough for a photo, but always there. He cut the hike short, scrambled down off trail, and spent the night curled behind a boulder, sleepless and soaked. When he made it back to his car, nothing felt sealed. Normally there's relief, right? The sense that the forest pushes you back out and resets. Instead, he said it felt like the woods had handed him off like a file, passed him along. And then he started hearing things in his house. Less than a week later. Footsteps, the sound of breaking twigs, the dragging shuffle of someone barefoot on moss through carpet. He moved 6 months later, but he said it followed him. Always watching, slightly removed but present, like it learned him in the trees. And now, it was just waiting for him to return. He ended the message with, "It's patient. Maybe I shouldn't be. No follow-up. No return address." Just his last words and a blackout. You hear enough of these stories, and you stop wondering whether it's just ghosts, demons, or something else entirely. You realize the woods are not something to identify. They're something to respect. Most places let you visit. The deep woods, they tolerate you. Until they don't. Until you stumble onto a place that isn't marked on GPS, where the trees are older than time, and something's carved into the dirt not to mark territory, but to record your arrival. And if that happens, well, don't talk to it. Don't follow it. Don't think about how it knew your name. And if you wake up and there's not a single sound outside, not birds, not wind, not even your own heartbeat, whatever it is, has already found you. Good night.